And you have to be paranoid to some extent because the most important thing as a founder is to just stay alive. So eventually I sort of just said, let me do like a one-way ticket to San Francisco and I'm not going to come back until I have a term sheet. So I went to all of the VC offices and they all said no. The main takeaway is to just be there. He declined on the deal, but I think he told Greg, maybe you guys could scoop it up or something. There's just like this whole like back channel thing going on in San Francisco. Third or fourth sentence was like, we want to acquire you guys. Like, we think you could be a really good fit. And I was like, that's really interesting, Shai. I really admire your company, but it's just, I think it's too late, man. I think we're a week from finalizing this thing. All of a sudden you're talking to HSBC or some other huge customer who is now using your product. As a founder, you should meet the people that you're about to jump into bed with, right? We believe so much in product engineering.
Hey everyone, today's guest is Rasmus Makwarth. In 2017, Rasmus sold his company to Elastic, as in Elasticsearch. And after working for them for a while, he is now the founder of Bucket, which is a B2B focused feature flagging tool. And, you know, Rasmus is very successful. But I think why this episode is rare and why it's a really interesting one is that Rasmus is also very honest. And you can hear in his voice when he tells you some of his experiences selling his first company about how honest he is being and how some of this stuff is actually pretty painful. It was quite stressful. And I think there's a lot of stuff to learn in there. And I really appreciate Rasmus coming on and, you know, sharing his honest insights. So enjoy the episode.
We were building, I think, a really innovative and great product, but we were also sort of rookie founders, which sort of led us to not really paying enough attention on how to get up market. So we had hundreds of SMB customers, but we never really got to the enterprise point, which you really need as a company. It was just around the time that people really started adopting GitHub. GitHub had come out like, I think 4 or 5 years prior, and everybody was using GitHub, of course. And it was really interesting for the APM error logging use case because, you know, as a developer, you were building a feature and you were sort of updating your product, deploying the feature, and then something might slow down or break altogether, and you would get an alert in your error logging tool. But why? Like, what caused that error? Like, why is that happening now? Did something change? And on Bucket, you could, on Opbeat, which was the name of the company. I'm all Bucket now, but Opbeat was the name of the company. And we had this Git integration so that we could actually tie the error or the performance regression to the engineer that touched the part of the code last. And it was not like a way for you to sort of go like, oh, we should fire this person. Absolutely not. It was just a way for, you know, teams not to spend time on figuring out why this is happening right now, because that's so boring. Like, you just want to fix it and move on, right? So we tried to automate that stuff, and it worked quite well. I think it was a very interesting, novel idea at the time.
Yeah, and I guess Elastic saw what you were doing, and I guess people probably know them more for the search, but they do like this elk stack, right? Of like just all the logging and searching your logs and stuff. And so they saw that you were like going to fit in really well with what they were doing.
Yeah, totally. We had, I think, 2 things going for us in relation to sort of the Elastic synergy. Like, they were massive in terms of the logging use case because people would just install the elk stack, as you said, and feed logs to Elasticsearch. But they didn't really know much about the performance inside of the application. You know, how long were people actually waiting for an entire page to load in the application, that sort of stuff. And observability was sort of on the rise at that time. Like, you wanted to consolidate logs and application metrics, server metrics, so that, you know, when one of the 3 was sort of spiking, you could correlate it with the other 3, and you could sort of get to resolution faster potentially. So observability was happening, and Elastic wanted to be part of it because they only sort of had the logging use case, a little bit about the server metrics, but they didn't have anything in the application layer. And they also wanted to get from open source to being a cloud vendor as well as open source. Like, they wanted to have a Elastic Cloud offering where you could just go in and spin up a cluster with Elasticsearch and get all this stuff out of the gate, right? Like a proper SaaS provider. And we were a SaaS company, and they didn't have many SaaS people in the company. So that was the other part of the synergy.
Okay, quick announcement. WorkOS are hosting a one-day conference dedicated to enterprise software. It's called the Enterprise Ready Conf, and it's taking place on October 30th in San Francisco. They have got the founder and CEO of Vanta, Christina, speaking, as well as the head of product for ChatGPT. Yes, ChatGPT, Brit. So if you've got questions for them, go along. And they've got the founder of WorkOS, of course, Michael Greenwich, who's been on the show twice, and you know how much he knows about enterprise software. So if you're kind of thinking about, selling enterprise software, or you already do it, you should definitely check out this conference. Go to enterprise-ready.com or click the link in the show notes. Yeah, so they were thinking like you're going to really help their product. That was like the kind of driving force.
Yeah, it was it was an interesting story how it came about, but I can dive into it if you want to. But it was it was it was in terms of the product offering that they wanted to get to. It was so clear that they needed to have like all three, like get into observability and also have that cloud offering, and they needed help from outside to get to the SaaS type experience. Like that's really like an app experience where it's like almost turnkey. So yeah, that was a big part of why they called us. But yeah, no, I can talk about how it happened if you
I'd love to hear.
Yeah. I'm getting like stress anxiety just thinking about it because it was a very stressful period.
You don't have to.
No, it's all right. It's all right. Yeah. I've had time to sort of come down. Like it's been a while now, right? But sometimes it sounds like this amazing, swift thing that just happened out of the blue. And I guess they also kind of do these acquisitions, but it was very stressful. Anyway, I was about to do another round of funding for Opbeat. We had done a few rounds already, and now we were getting into the third one. And the first two has been kind of easy for us because we had some great angels, like the co-founder of Instagram, co-founder of Facebook, CTO of Spotify. Like there was some great angels, and at the time that meant a lot. Like these days, I guess it's more common, but back then it meant a lot. And we therefore also raised like an institutional round really swiftly after. And now we were then doing the follow-up round, and because it had been sort of easy based off of those angels and space initially, we probably took it lighter than we should have. Like we thought it would be easier. So I went to all of the VC offices, and they all said no because we had the low ACV. Like the average account size of our accounts was just quite low because we had so many startup SMB customers. We had a lot of them, but we didn't have anyone who sort of had really grown with us and was paying us, $50K a year or something like that. Like we hadn't gotten to that point. And with that, it was just very hard for them to make a VC case out of it, understandably. But we were rookie founders, and we didn't know what we were doing to some extent. So the fundraising became harder and harder, and I spent a lot of time speaking to VCs and just hustling. The team was in Europe back then. I'm from Europe. But I went back and forth to do these meetings in Perth, and it was just kind of exhausting with the jet lag and all that stuff. So eventually I sort of just said, like, let me do like a one-way ticket to San Francisco, and I'm not going to come back until I have a term sheet. Like, let me just go get this thing fixed, right? So I was just on the ground hustling for weeks and months. And finally we got to a point where we had a term sheet from Battery and Creandum, and it was an okay round. It was not the best round, but it was a round, and we were happy with it. And good VCs, good partners. Like it was okay. But as part of just speaking to so many VCs, I also bumped into a bunch of random people, and you really have to, just focus. So many people want to speak with you. Like Gartner calls you up and wants to do a research call in terms of their quadrants or whatever. It's not important. Like, you have to say no to these things when you're not anywhere near like the Gartner quadrant, right? So there's a lot of inbound stuff. And I remember being, running around doing these VC meetings, and a guy from Elastic called Greg, a great guy, I learned later, but he was a biz dev guy at Elastic, and he sort of had this vague email like, "Could we just grab coffee? I'm interested in the space or something." And he was like, "Okay, sure, okay." We met at Blue Bottle, but I was really like, I don't have time for this. Like, we're running out of runway. I need some money. I need to make sure that my team is good and all that, right? So we spent like 30 minutes in a Blue Bottle, and I didn't really feel like there was any value to it. Like, he sort of asked some questions. I did some storytelling about why we existed, and then he sort of disappeared. And I think we signed the term sheet like a week after and got into actually finalizing the papers, which in my experience is always like a 4-6 week period of just talking to lawyers and whatnot, right? So we were at that stage, really happy that we were getting this done, right? And then Greg calls us and says, "Can you and your co-founder jump on a call with Shai, who's the CEO and founder of Elastic?" And we're like, "Yeah, sure." But we're really like, we've just spent so much time fundraising, and we wanted to get back to customers and building product, like, because it's such a distraction, like a huge distraction doing fundraising, also just mentally draining, right? So we were just like, we just crossed the finish line to some extent. We really just wanted to get back to building and getting ready for our Series A. But we jumped on the call, and Shai was just wonderful. Like, he's a really nice guy, and he's an engineer, and he's really into good products. And like, we had a really good conversation and spoke for more than an hour and gave him a bit of demo. And we didn't really know what it was all about, but we could sort of sense that, acquisition is potentially part of this, but it could also be some sort of, "Hey, do you guys want to integrate with us?" or something, much less important. So we continued with the finalizing the paperwork, and our investors were happy. We were getting this done, getting back to, getting more customers. But then Greg 2 weeks later called me again and said, like, we were almost done at this point, like really close. And he said, Can you come down to Mountain View? I want you to meet Shai." I was like, "Yeah, I'm in SF. Like, that's an hour train ride both ways, right? And I don't have time for this, Greg. I really don't. You guys need to just stop calling me because I'm trying to focus on building my business here." But I then went down to Mountain View, and Greg was in the reception, and he sort of guided me into this meeting room where Shai was sitting, and he said hello, of course, but like third or fourth sentence was like, "We want to acquire you guys. Like, we think you could be a really good fit to what we do." And I was like, that's really interesting, Shai. And I really admire your company, but it's just, I think it's too late, man. I think we're a week from finalizing this thing. Everybody's happy now. I worked my ass. I'm exhausted. Like, and in the back of my mind, I was also thinking, what if they just want to, what if they're saying this to 10 other companies? I could be spending so much time with them, and they end up buying another company in the same space. And I've just wrecked the deal with the VCs potentially. And I spent and I wasted a lot of other time, right? And time is just so important in founder startup land. But I guess we took a leap of faith, and we really liked Shai and Elastic. We were huge fans of Elastic, of course. So we said and we're luckily in a somewhat decent negotiation position because we had an alternative. Like, we could really just say no. And by the way, I learned later that they knew we weren't just bluffing, because I think maybe this is the most interesting part, actually. Like, the way it all came about, I think, was that Elastic eternally had thought, like, we want to get into the observability space. We do logging, but we don't do application layer. Who does this, right? That we could buy. And Greg, their biz dev guy, he, of course, knows a lot of VCs. And I think the story is that I, at one point, pitched a GP at Charles River Ventures called Max, and he declined on the deal because of the ACV size and all that stuff. But I think he told Greg, like this product is good. Rasmus seems cool too, I guess.
It's the key factor.
But we're not doing the deal because it's too early for us. So maybe you guys could scoop it up or something. So when they when we said, okay, let's talk more with Elastic, we said we only have a few days to get this done. Like, if you really want to do this, like, we need like an offer and a letter of intent. We need all that stuff really fast. And yeah, 2 days later they came with like an offer, and funnily enough, it was like the offer was so close to the valuation that we've been going around town telling all VCs. So like, there's just like this whole like back channel thing going on in San Francisco, of course, where everybody sort of is speaking to each other, and I don't know. And I'm trying to game it, like talking like we can get a higher valuation over here, but they all know, of course, what the valuation is. I think they talk a lot. But we were in a good negotiation position, as I mentioned, because we had an alternative, so we could bump up the value somewhat and also give a good deal to the employees. So we ended up doing it, but it was so stressful because at the time I really thought that I could potentially wreck the whole thing, like the relationship with the new VCs, but also not get acquired because they were just going to jerk me around. And you have to be paranoid to some extent because it's your business, right? You just have to, like, the most important thing as a founder is to just stay alive, and I was sort of risking all of that. So that was very stressful, but in the end it worked out, and the whole team came with everyone except one, and they all stayed with Elastic for a long time, and some of them are still there now, a long time after. So it turned out well. I guess the main takeaway is to just be there, right? Like, if I hadn't pitched CRV, then Max wouldn't have told Greg wouldn't have told Shai. I guess you just have to be out there.
Specifically in San Francisco.
Yeah, at least back then. I think nowadays it's different. Back then it felt like you had to do these meetings in person, otherwise you were sort of not serious. I think these days you can do most over Zoom, and it's okay. It doesn't really give you a sense of not being serious, or and maybe you're just responsible because you're not flying around. Like, I think there's a lot of things that have changed for the better, probably, right? And there's also many more VCs and in Europe that can help. But back then it was very much SF or nowhere.
So just get on, like, but I guess now, like, when you're fundraising with Bucket, like, would you go out to SF, like, as like your
I did go to SF, but I also did a bunch of meetings with SF investors just over Zoom, and it was just as fine. Like, and we ended up doing our latest round of funding with a European fund, so it didn't actually materialize, but it wasn't for that reason at all. We just found a really, really good fit here, but I think it's totally viable to do it over Zoom. But as a founder, you should meet the people that you're about to jump into bed with, right? Because you really are, like, you're getting married to these people, and you might be working with them for 10 years. So for your sake, I would talk to them and spend time with them, But you can do that after you get a term sheet, or you can do it close to the term sheet, like all of the pitching and all of the stuff. You don't have to run around booking flights, and I think you can do a lot of that stuff on Zoom. I think you will still have higher chance to come off as the person you are in person. That still just works better. But I don't think that you're not serious because you're talking over Zoom. Like that has been sort of normalized, I think. But yeah, you should spend time with them. Like, man, you have a board, and then that's just the people you work with for, and you see them more than your family, some of them, or at least you're like, they will be with you for a long time, right? So yeah, I can't stress that enough. Spend time with the people you make deals with.
Yeah, maybe this is kind of a tangent we weren't thinking about, but would like, people often say, like, spend time and like get the right VCs and stuff, and like, what what should people actually be looking for?
Yeah. And it's also kind of bullshit because you have to just stay alive, right? And sometimes the VC that will give you a term sheet is not the favorite VC in your book, right? Maybe you have some others who you preferred that passed on you, and you should still do the deal. Like you should still stay alive. I think that's the name of the game, right? So it sounds so easy to just spend time together. I would say though, if like signing a term sheet with someone that you've never spent a day with, I think it's kind of crazy still. I mean, it doesn't have, you don't have to get along. Like you just have to make sure that you're both pragmatic and you're like good people at, then it's okay that you don't become buddies. Like that's not at all what this is about, but it has to be someone that you can talk with and also share like when things are going bad, and like there has to be some trust there. Otherwise it's not going to go well. But you also have to stay alive. So it's a very hard balance.
What kind of things did you learn when you were with Elastic?
Yeah. So you mentioned the elk stack earlier, which was the K in elk is Kibana, which is like the UI for Elasticsearch. Like that's how people were consuming the logs, right? And I remember Kibana at the time when we got acquired, it was just like pink and black and a really slow application, like really bad UX. And one of the things that we had going for us was that we were so much better than the incumbents in the space, like AppDynamics and New Relic. And like we had some things going for us where we were just like super easy to get going with and integrate with Git, as I mentioned, and did a bunch of things that were just like so nice from a product perspective. And all of a sudden you now had to work with this thing that was just like the opposite. It's gotten much better, but back then it wasn't good. And that was really demotivating. Like, okay, all of this, our baby, and all of the sweat and tears to build this product is just gonna go into this thing. So you just have, so that was a bummer. But of course, then the flip side is all of a sudden you're talking to HSBC or some other huge customer who is now using your product on tons of data with tons of people relying on it, right? And that's very exciting. So there are good and bad things on the other side. I learned a ton in terms of enterprise sales and how an organization of 1,000 people is working. Like I was a product owner for what became Elastic Observability. So first Opbeat became Elastic APM, and then later we transformed it all into Elastic Observability. And I was sort of the PO for that product. And I was also at the extended leadership team at Elastic, where we got together every quarter and talked about the biggest fires in the company at that given time and how we could fix it, like cross functions. And you just learn so much, like getting into a company of that size with all of the problems that come with it. Like at that point we were like hiring 80 people a month. Like how do you integrate those people into the culture, and how do you make everybody productive and happy? And like, so it was very different, maybe, to answer your question, but it was also very inspiring, and I learned a ton. That was outside of the stuff that I already knew about. Like I'm good product, I know strategy, I know these things, but how to do it at scale with enterprises and how to scale an organization, I had no experience with. So I also think our story was quite good. I've heard other stories that weren't as good, but I think one of the reasons we got fortunate with Elastic coming for us was because it was such a tech-led company. Like the CEO Shai was literally the first engineer on Elasticsearch, the open source project, right? That it came from him. And now he was at the top of this huge company, but he was still a product guy, like deep down, and a technical guy. And that we just vibe really nicely with people like him. So from that point of view, it was a really good experience. But I think it could have been a very different experience if we had been picked up by another company.
Yeah, and they were just like sales led or that sort of thing.
Yeah, exactly. At Elastic, you can actually make investments that are huge, like, and don't think about the next quarter. Like you can actually, but this was pre-IPO. Elastic went on to IPO, so it might be different now, right? Companies change and they have these different modes. But at that time, we could still make big bets, which was very cool.
One of the things that you mentioned was about B2B and kind of going out market. And it seems to be that that's a big theme with Bucket as well.
So in terms of ACV and coming from feature flagging, which is the category Bucket is in, like we do feature flagging for B2B. What is interesting about that, I think, is the first concept of a feature from a technical point of view is when you flag it in your code base. Like you're about to release a new feature and then you wrap it in a feature flagging key, which can sort of control, with this key, you can control who has access to this feature, right? But if you sort of take that feature that you've now made into a sort of structured item, like an object, right? That's useful for so many other functions in the company, because who has access to this feature? Just like basic question, like who has access to it? That's sometimes hard to know. And in B2B, you want to look at the account level, not the user level. So there's a lot of B2B stuff there where you just want to make sure that you know who actually has access to this feature. But more importantly, who's using it and where are they on the usage curve? Did they just try it out, or did they truly adopt it? Did they maybe regress from it? What about from a qualitative point of view? Are they happy with it? Or are they using it because they have to get their job done, but they don't really like using it, so they're sort of looking for an alternative, maybe another vendor. And then for instance, if the adoption is low, the PMM team will then need to sort of figure out how they can make those people who are unaware of the feature aware of the feature. And if the satisfaction is low, then there's a high burden on support for that feature, right? Because they get asked a bunch of questions because maybe the feature is confusing or whatnot.
Yeah, that makes sense. So you're kind of just helping people with like not just the kind of initial feature testing and sort of like it's the whole rollout and like making use of it, understanding who's using it, kind of sending that data elsewhere.
And that's the new thing. Like we believe so much in product engineering. Like engineers and designers are great problem solvers. You just need to get them the customer feedback. And today in most organizations, we have, customer success or support or PMs in between that sort of owns the post-deployment feature evaluation, if you like. And it sometimes takes a long time. And in some organizations, it doesn't happen at all. And then that means that the engineers release the feature. They sort of emoji celebrate because they ticked off the backlog item and they got it out there, right? And then they move on to the next thing. But it really should be like more agile in the sense that you've loaded up all this feature information in your head right now. You've just released it to the customers. Now the customers are seeing this feature for the first time, and that's where we drop attention, right? Like it's kind of crazy. Like instantly or as rapidly as possible, you should be getting some initial reactions to that feature.
If there's one takeaway for founders listening, DevTools founders, what would it be?
Well, solve problems. I think that's certainly something that I've been better at understanding. And you also did a great episode on it with, I believe, Adam. What's his name? Yeah. It was a great episode. Thank you for doing that. So just solve problems and stay on the problem and keep focus. I think it's very important.
Amazing. And then the other question, which one of our audience asked us to ask, is what DevTools are you excited about right now? I'm going to hold you to just a couple.
Well, I'm going to say it's going to be very boring, but AI is just very interesting, of course. And it's also interesting in the context of product engineering, because if we get more and more help in terms of writing the syntax, I think engineers are also getting closer to being problem solvers as opposed to code producers. Like if we get help producing the code, we can spend more time talking to customers and help their problems actually, right? With the code that we get produced. So I think also it's a career path and a wise career path for an engineer to spend some time on product engineering.
So what I'm hearing is Cursor, Copilot, all those sorts of things.
Yeah.
Okay, amazing. And so if people want to learn more, they can go to bucket.co. Is that
Bucket.co? Yeah. I'm
bucket.co?
at Makwarth at Twitter. It's this World of Warcraft sounding last name that I have, but it's legit.
That just sounds actually like English to me. I don't know if that means
It
World
does.
of Warcraft. Yeah. Rasmus, thank you so much for joining, and thanks everyone for listening.
Thank you.